The stars above Prime burned cold and distant as Commander stood on the bridge of his warship. He was tall, even for a standing nearly 8 feet with purple scales covering his muscular body. His 4 arms rested on the command console before him, each hand ready to issue orders that would decide the fate of millions. The eternal silence was the pride of the hegemony, 2 kilometers of death and destruction, carrying enough weapons to burn a continent to ash, had commanded this vessel for 40 cycles, and in that time he had never known defeat. No species had ever successfully resisted none ever would. Below the fleet, the planet Prime turned slowly on its axis. It was a beautiful world, covered in blue oceans and green forests. The who lived there had built cities of white stone and crystal, had developed art and music and philosophy. They were a peaceful species, more interested in understanding the universe than conquering it. That peaceful nature would be their doom. Looked at the tactical display showing his fleet. 43 warships had come to claim this world. Destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and the mighty eternal silence itself. Against them, they had managed to gather only 12 defense vessels, small things that looked like toys compared to. "Commander," said his communications officer. The younger scales were darker thence, marking him as coming from the southern continent of there. "They are attempting to establish communication." "Let them speak," said. "It changes nothing, but I would hear their words before we begin." The mane flickered, and a face appeared. They were a delicate species, with large eyes and thin bodies covered in soft white fur. This one wore the markings of a senior official, golden bands wrapped around his slender arms. "I am first speaker of Prime," they said. His voice trembled slightly, but he maintained his dignity. "We ask why you have come to our world with weapons of war. They have never threatened the hegemony. We seek only peace." Allowed himself a thin smile. "You have something we want, first speaker. Your world is rich in minerals. Your population will provide excellent workers for our mining operations. You will surrender immediately, or we will take what we want by force." "We cannot surrender our people to slavery," replied. "Surely there must be another way. Trade, perhaps, or some form of agreement that benefits both our species." "There is no negotiation. There is only submission or destruction." Leaned forward in his command throne. "You have one planetary rotation to make your choice. Surrender and live as servants of the hegemony, or resist and watch your cities burn. The choice is yours." He gestured to who cut the transmission. The leader vanished from the screen, replaced by the tactical display. "They will not surrender," said the weapons officer. He was old for his scales faded to a pale lavender. "They are soft, but they have pride. They will choose death over slavery." "Then we will give them death," replied. "Begin targeting their population centers. When the deadline passes, we will demonstrate the cost of defiance." The bridge crew worked efficiently, preparing the weapons that would soon tear apart a civilization. Watched them with satisfaction. This was how the universe worked. The strong took from the weak. They had learned this lesson long ago, when they were young and vulnerable. They had sworn never to be weak again. Now they were the strongest species in this sector of the galaxy. Their empire stretched across 200 star systems, encompassing dozens of subjugated species. They would simply be the latest addition to that empire. Hours passed as the fleet waited. On the planet below, knew they would be panicking. Some would be trying to evacuate, cramming into shuttles and transport ships in a desperate attempt to escape. Others would be gathering their families, saying goodbye to loved ones they might never see again. A few, the brave or the foolish, would be preparing to fight. None of it mattered. The outcome was already decided. "Commander," said suddenly, his voice strange, "I am detecting an anomaly." Turned to look at his communications officer. "What kind of anomaly?" "I do not know, Commander. It is unlike anything in our databases." His 4 hands moved rapidly across his console. There is a disruption in normal space approximately 50,000 kilometers from our position. Energy readings are extremely high and climbing. Show me. The tactical display shifted to show the area had indicated. At first, saw nothing unusual. Then the stars in that region began to blur and shift, as if reality itself was being bent out of shape. "What in the void is that?" muttered. The distortion grew larger, and felt the eternal silence shudder beneath him. Other ships in the fleet reported similar tremors. Whatever was happening, it was affecting the entire region of space. Then the distortion tore open. It was not a normal hyperspace emergence. Had seen thousands of ships transition from faster-than-light travel to normal space. This was different. This was violent, almost angry, a wound in the fabric of reality itself. And through that wound came ships. They were unlike anything had ever seen. Angular and aggressive, painted in dark colors that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They bristled with weapons, more weapons than seemed possible for vessels their size. And they were large. One of them, the largest, was nearly 3 times the size of the eternal silence. "Identify those vessels," commanded, keeping his voice steady despite his shock. "I cannot, Commander," replied. "Their configuration matches nothing in our databases. Energy signatures are unknown. Hull composition is unknown." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "Commander, there is a partial match in the ancient archives, a reference in the mythological texts." "Speak clearly, officer." Turned to face him and saw something he had never seen in one of his crew. Fear, pure primal terror. "The Terrans, Commander. These signatures match the descriptions in the scrolls of first contact. The lost ones have returned." Silence fell across the bridge. Every officer had stopped their work to stare at where 17 impossible vessels now hung in space. The Terrans were a legend, a story told to explain ancient mysteries. They had supposedly been a young species from a small blue world, curious and hopeful, who had made contact with the galactic community long before the rose to power. And then they had vanished. Some stories said they had destroyed themselves in a great war. Others claimed they had ascended to a higher form of existence, leaving the physical universe behind. Still others whispered that they had retreated into the darkness between stars, hiding from a galaxy that had proven too cruel for their gentle nature. No serious scholar believed they had ever truly existed. They were myth, fantasy, a cautionary tale about the dangers of space. But now 17 ships that matched the ancient descriptions hung before the fleet, and felt cold dread spreading through his chest. "This is impossible," said. "The Terrans are fiction." "Then what are those ships?" another officer asked. Before anyone could answer, a transmission cut through every channel. It broadcast not just to the fleet but to the defenders and the planet below. Universal translators struggled for a moment, then a voice emerged. A female voice, calm and controlled, carrying an authority that made even scales prickle. "This is Admiral Cole of the Terran Defense Force Carrier Enduring Hope. You are currently engaged in hostile action against a protected species. You will stand down immediately, withdraw your forces from this system, and never return. Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of your fleet. This is your only warning." The transmission ended, leaving a ringing silence on the bridge. Stared at his mind racing. 17 ships against 43. Even if these Terrans were real, even if their technology was advanced, how could they possibly threaten an invasion force? It had to be a bluff. Some unknown species had emerged with impressive ships and hoped to frighten the into retreat. It would not work. "Open a channel," ordered. "Channel open, Commander." "Unknown vessels, I am commander of the hegemony. Your threats are meaningless. You are outnumbered and outmatched. Withdraw now, or you will be destroyed alongside You have interfered in matters that do not concern you. Leave, and we may forget this insult." He expected anger in the response, threats, bluster. Instead, the Admiral's voice remained utterly calm, almost conversational. "Commander, I'm going to assume you don't know who we are. That's understandable. We've been away for a while. So I'm going to give you one chance to make the smart choice. Turn your ships around. Go home. Tell your hegemony that this sector is now under Terran protection. Any species that preys on the weak will answer to us. And if I refuse, then you'll learn why your ancestors wrote legends about us." Felt a flicker of doubt, but he crushed it beneath his pride. They did not retreat. They did not show weakness. If these Terrans wanted a fight, they would get one. "All ships," he announced on the fleet-wide channel, "target the unknown vessels. Destroy them." 43 warships turned their weapons toward the 17 Terran ships. Plasma cannons charged with deadly energy, targeting computers locked onto enemy hulls. They had never lost a fleet engagement in all their history. Today would be no different. Fire commanded. The first volley streaked across the void, hundreds of plasma bolts burning bright against the darkness of space. They raced toward the Terran vessels, carrying enough destructive power to crack moons. And then the Terrans moved. Had never seen ships maneuver like that. They seemed to dance, sliding and spinning through space with a grace that should have been impossible for vessels their size. The largest one, the carrier, barely moved at all, but the smaller ships swept forward like predators rushing to meet prey. But that was not what makes blood run cold. From the carrier and the other Terran ships, thousands of small objects launched into space. At first, he thought they were missiles or drones. Then he realized they were intercepting the plasma bolts. Tiny projectiles, guided by some impossibly precise system, were destroying the weapon's fire before it could reach its targets. "Point defense," breathed. "They have point defense that can track plasma fire." Watched in disbelief as the entire first volley was shredded into harmless particles. Not a single bolt reached a Terran ship. "All ships fire again," he ordered. Continuous fire overwhelmed their defenses. The fleet unleashed everything they had. Plasma cannons fired as fast as they could cycle. Missile batteries launched their payloads. Even the main batteries of the larger ships, weapons meant for destroying orbital stations and cracking planetary crusts, joined the assault. It made no difference. The Terran point defense systems adapted, spreading out to cover more angles. The interceptor fire became even more accurate, predicting where the plasma bolts would be and destroying them before they arrived. And through it all, the Terran ships continued their advance. "Commander, they are launching strike craft," reported. Looked at the tactical display and felt his heart begin to pound. Hundreds of small fighters were pouring from the Terran carrier, spreading out in formations that covered the approaching fleet. They were fast, faster than anything they had ever built, and they moved with a coordination that suggested either perfect training or direct machine control. "Target the fighters," ordered. "Point defense batteries shift to anti-fighter operations." But the point defense systems had been designed for a different kind of warfare. They could track and destroy missiles, could engage enemy torpedoes before they reached their targets. They were not designed to hit targets as small and agile as these Terran fighters. The fighters wove through the defensive fire with contemptuous ease. They twisted and rolled, their pilots seeming to predict exactly where each plasma bolt would go. And then they were among the ships, and they began their work. On the bridge of the destroyer Void's Edge, Captain had only moments to realize his mistake. He had ordered his ship to concentrate fire on the Terran carrier, believing that destroying the enemy flagship would break the attack. Instead, his vessel had been marked as a priority target. 6 Terran fighters swept toward the Void's Edge in perfect formation. They were not large, perhaps 20 meters from nose to tail, but they carried weapons that glowed with an energy he did not recognize. As he watched, the lead fighter fired. A beam of concentrated light struck the Void's Edge amidships. It punched through the shields as if they were not there, carved through the armored hull, and continued straight through to the other side of the ship. The destroyer's spine was severed in a single shot. Secondary explosions rippled through the vessel as power conduits overloaded and fuel lines ignited. Had time to reach for the emergency evacuation button before the reactor containment failed. The Void's edge died in a bloom of purple fire, taking all 400 of its crew with it. From his command throne aboard the Eternal Silence, watched the destroyer vanish from his tactical display. One moment it had been there, a powerful warship that had participated in the conquest of 7 worlds. The next, it was nothing but expanding debris. "Commander's voice cracked with panic. "The Crimson Fury is taking fire. The Wrath of the Void is reporting hull breaches. The Dawn Crusher has lost engine power." Could not respond. He could only watch as his invincible fleet began to die. The Terran ships had reached optimal engagement range, and they were demonstrating weapons technology that could not have imagined. The larger vessels carried that accelerated metal projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. When those projectiles hit a ship, they did not stop. They punched through shields, through armor, through internal compartments and out the other side. A single hit could cripple a warship. And the Terrans were not missing. The cruiser Stellar Flame took 3 rounds in rapid succession. The first destroyed its forward weapons array. The second penetrated its engine block. The third hit the reactor, and the cruiser exploded with enough force to damage 2 nearby destroyers. The battleship Dominion tried to flee, engaging its faster-than-light drive in a desperate attempt to escape. A Terran destroyer ran it down, matching its speed somehow, and carved it apart with directed energy weapons that sliced through the hull like cutting tools through soft wood. Everywhere looked, ships were dying. The fighters swarmed through the fleet, targeting weapons systems and engine blocks with surgical precision. When a ship tried to flee, they disabled its drives. When a ship tried to fight, they stripped away its weapons. They were not simply destroying the fleet, they were dissecting it. "Commander, we must retreat," shouted. "We cannot win this engagement." Knew his weapons officer was right. 20 ships had already been destroyed or disabled, and the Terrans had not lost a single vessel. But they did not retreat. In all their history, they had never fled from an enemy. To do so would be to admit defeat, to show weakness that other species would exploit. "All ships concentrate fire on the enemy carrier," ordered. "If we can destroy their flagship, we may still win this battle." The surviving ships attempted to comply, turning their remaining weapons toward the enduring hope. The massive carrier had remained relatively stationary throughout the engagement, trusting its escorts and fighters to protect it. Now dozens of plasma cannons targeted its hull. The barrage lasted for 30 seconds. Every ship that could fire did so, pouring destruction toward the Terran carrier. Surely, no vessel could survive such an assault. When the fire cleared, the enduring hope was undamaged. The carrier's point defense had been even more impressive than had realized. Not a single plasma bolt had reached its hull. The barrage that should have destroyed any ship in the galaxy had been completely negated. And now the enduring hope was moving. The massive carrier advanced toward the fleet, and as it approached, it revealed weapons that had remained hidden until now. Hatches along its flanks opened, exposing launch tubes of enormous size. Something stirred in those tubes, something that made tactical displays scream with warnings. "Commander, massive energy buildup from the enemy carrier," reported. "Unknown weapon signature, unknown weapon signature." The enduring hope fired. Missiles launched from those tubes, but they were missiles unlike anything had ever seen. They were huge, nearly the size of a fighter, and they accelerated at speeds that should have been impossible. As they flew, they seemed to multiply, each missile splitting into a dozen smaller warheads that spread out to cover different targets. The point defense tried to engage them. It failed. The warheads were too fast, too agile, equipped with countermeasures that confused tracking systems and decoys that drew fire away from the real threats. The battleship Conqueror's Pride was the first to be hit. A single warhead struck its shields and detonated. The explosion was not plasma or nuclear or any conventional weapon. It was something else, something that seemed to tear apart the very fabric of space around the impact point. The shields collapsed, the armor warped and shattered. The hull was pulled apart by forces that explanation. In less than a second, the greatest battleship in the fleet was reduced to twisted wreckage. "What was that?" whispered. Had no answer. He had never seen a weapon like that. He had never imagined a weapon like that. More warheads found their targets. The cruiser Endless War vanished in a flash of distorted space. The destroyer Storm of Vengeance was torn in half. 3 more ships died in rapid succession, their crews never knowing what killed them. And through it all, the Terran fighters continued their relentless assault, and the Terran warships continued their advance, and the fleet continued to die. "Commander's voice was barely recognizable, raw with terror. "We have lost 30 ships in less than 20 minutes. Looked at his tactical display. The numbers were impossible. 30 warships destroyed or disabled with only 13 remaining. The Terrans had lost nothing, not a single ship, not a single fighter. The battle had been completely one-sided. "All ships," said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, "all ships cease fire and hold position." The surviving ships obeyed, their weapons falling silent. The Terran assault paused as well, the fighters pulling back, the warships holding their positions. For a moment, an uneasy stillness fell over the battlefield. Then the main flickered, and Admiral Cole's face appeared. She was older than had expected, her hair gray and her face lined with age. But her eyes were sharp and clear, and her expression showed no triumph, no gloating, only calm determination. "Commander," she said, "I'm going to give you one more chance. Surrender your remaining vessels, and your crews will be treated as prisoners of war under the Terran Convention of Conflict. You will be held humanely and eventually returned to your people when hostilities conclude. Continue fighting and you will be destroyed. There is no third option." Looked at what remained of his fleet. 13 ships against 17, and those 17 had just demonstrated capabilities that made them look like primitives. If he continued to fight, they would all die. Every officer, every crew member, every warrior who had followed him to this place. They did not surrender. It was their greatest law, their deepest tradition. To surrender was to accept permanent shame, to be marked forever as a coward. But to die for nothing, to sacrifice his crews for pride alone, would that be courage? Or would it be foolishness? "I accept your terms," said. The words felt like broken glass in his throat. "The fleet surrenders." Admiral Cole nodded, showing no satisfaction at his submission. "A wise choice, Commander. Your ships will be escorted to a holding area. Your crews will be transferred to the surface of Prime, where they will be held until arrangements can be made. If your people cooperate, this process will be painless for everyone." The transmission ended and slumped in his command throne. Around him, his bridge crew stood in shocked silence. None of them could believe what had just happened. The mighty conquerors of 200 worlds had been defeated in less than half an hour by a species that should not exist. As Terran ships moved to escort the surviving vessels, stared at the enduring hope hung there, massive and powerful, its hull unmarked by the battle that had just concluded. The lost ones had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same. Far below, on the surface of Prime, they watched in wonder as the invasion force surrendered. They had expected annihilation. They had prepared to die fighting against impossible odds. Instead, they had been saved by beings from legend. First Speaker stood in the communications center of the capital city, watching the tactical feeds from orbit. His staff surrounded him, their white fur standing on end with a mixture of fear and amazement. First speaker, one of his aides said, "The Terrans are hailing us." Took a deep breath and composed himself. "Accept the transmission." The showed a human face, a younger male with dark skin and kind eyes. He wore a military uniform with insignia did not recognize. First speaker, "I am Lieutenant Commander Daniel Hayes of the Terran Defense Force. Admiral Cole sends her regards and wishes me to inform you that the threat to your world has been neutralized. The forces have surrendered and are being secured as we speak." "We are grateful beyond words," replied. "But I must ask, why have you helped us? We have nothing to offer you. We are a small people with no military power and few resources worth taking. Why would you risk your ships and your lives for us?" Daniel smiled, and there was warmth in his expression. "Because protecting those who cannot protect themselves is what we do." First speaker, "The galaxy has been ruled by predators for too long. Species like they have preyed on the weak because no one was strong enough to stop them. We intend to change that. You would protect us, without asking for anything in return. We ask only that you treat others as you would wish to be treated, that you extend kindness to those weaker than yourself, that you remember when you look at the stars that you are not alone." Felt tears forming in his large eyes. His species had spent generations living in fear, knowing that someday a predator would come for them. They had built no weapons, raised no armies, because they knew it would make no difference. The strong did what they wished, and the weak suffered what they must. But now, perhaps, things could be different. "Thank you," said. "Thank you for everything." "You're welcome." First speaker, "We'll be in touch soon to discuss more formal arrangements. For now, know that you are safe. The Terran Defense Force will not allow anyone to harm your people." The transmission ended and turned to face his staff. They were all staring at him, waiting for guidance, waiting to understand what this impossible day meant for their future. "We have been given a gift," said slowly. "A gift of life and freedom. We must not waste it. We must become worthy of the sacrifice these Terrans have made for us." "What do you mean?" First speaker, one of his aides asked. "I mean that we can no longer simply exist. We must grow. We must learn. We must become a people who can stand beside our protectors as partners, not merely as wards." Looked out the window at the night sky where the distant lights of ships were still visible. "The Terrans have given us a chance. Now we must prove we deserve it." In orbit, Admiral Cole stood on the observation deck of the Enduring Hope, watching as her crews secured the surrendered vessels. The operation was proceeding smoothly, as she had known it would. Her people had trained for this moment for their entire lives. She was 63 years old, born on Earth itself, in a city called Chicago that no longer existed in the form she remembered. When she was young, humanity had been preparing, building ships, developing weapons, training the generations who would someday have to face the galaxy. Now that day had come, and felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because they had proven themselves, because they had saved a people who would have been enslaved or destroyed. Sorrow because she knew this was only the beginning. There were one threat among many. The galaxy was filled with predators, and humanity would have to face them all. The door behind her opened, and she heard familiar footsteps approach. "Admiral," Daniel Hayes said, "they have been informed of their protection status." First speaker seemed genuinely moved by the gesture. "Good," continued to watch the stars. "How are the crews holding up?" "Morale is high, Admiral. Everyone performed exactly as trained, but I think the reality of what we just did is starting to sink in. We destroyed 30 warships without losing a single vessel. Some of the younger officers are calling it a miracle." "It's not a miracle. It's 500 years of preparation." Finally turned to face her subordinate. "Our ancestors made sacrifices we can barely imagine. They built the ships we fly today. They developed the weapons we just used. They trained generation after generation, knowing they would never see the fruits of their labor. And now we're here." And now we're here, smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. Do you know what the hardest part of this is, Daniel? It's not the fighting, it's not the killing, it's knowing that this is just the beginning. That will tell their hegemony what happened here. Word will spread to other powers. Some will be smart enough to avoid us. Others will see us as a challenge. And we'll face them too. We'll face them all because that's what humanity does. We protect, we defend, we stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. Looked back at the stars. It's a heavy burden, Daniel. Are you ready to carry it? Daniel considered the question carefully. He thought about the fear they must have felt when they arrived. He thought about all the other species in the galaxy who lived under the same fear, who knew that someday a predator might come for them. Yes, Admiral, he said, I'm ready. Good, put a hand on his shoulder, because we have a lot of work to do. Below them, the planet Prime turned slowly on its axis. Its people were safe, at least for now. But out there in the vast darkness of space, other worlds still trembled under the threat of conquest. Other species still lived in fear. The Terrans had returned. The myths had become real, and the galaxy would learn that humanity was not a species to be forgotten. In the holding area aboard a Terran cruiser, Commander sat in a cell that was surprisingly comfortable. He had expected torture, humiliation, the kind of treatment that would have given to captured enemies. Instead, he had been given food, water, and medical attention for a wound he had sustained during the battle. A human guard stood outside his cell, a young female with short brown hair and an expression of professional neutrality. She did not mock him or threaten him. She simply stood watch, as any guard would. Why? Finally asked. The guard looked at him. Why what? Why do you treat us this way? We came to enslave a world. We would have killed millions. Why are you treating us with courtesy? The guard considered the question for a moment before answering. Because treating prisoners humanely is the right thing to do. Because you're no longer a threat, so there's no need for cruelty. Because how we treat our enemies says more about us than it does about them. Did not understand. The concept was alien to everything he had been taught. In culture, captured enemies were displayed as trophies, used as labor until they died, or killed for entertainment. The idea of treating them with basic dignity was incomprehensible. You are a strange species, he said. The guard smiled slightly. We've been told that before. The stories about you are wrong, you know. The old legends say you were gentle and naive, explorers who wanted only to learn, but you are warriors. You defeated my fleet with contemptuous ease. We became what we had to become. The guard's smile faded. When humanity first reached the stars, we were exactly what the legends describe, curious, hopeful. We thought we would find friends out there. Instead, we found a galaxy that wanted to destroy us. So we changed. You hid. We prepared. There's a difference. The guard met his eyes. We spent 500 years getting ready for this day, building ships, developing technology, training our people. We knew that someday we would have to face the galaxy again, and when we did, we would have to be strong enough to survive. Thought about this. 500 years. His own species had risen to dominance in less time than that. And all that time, the Terrans had been hiding in the darkness, growing stronger. What will you do now? He asked. Protect the innocent, punish the guilty. Build a galaxy where species like yours can't prey on species like the guard shrugged. It's a big job, it might take a while. You cannot change the fundamental nature of the universe. The strong will always dominate the weak. It is the way of things. Maybe the universe just needed someone strong enough to protect the weak. The guard turned away, ending the conversation. Get some rest, Commander. You have a long journey ahead of you. Lay back on his bunk and stared at the ceiling. His fleet was destroyed. His career was over. His people would likely execute him for his failure, assuming the Terrans ever returned him to space. But despite everything, he found himself feeling something unexpected, Not anger, not despair, something closer to curiosity. The Terrans were something new, something the galaxy had never seen before, a species strong enough to defeat the mightiest military power in the sector, yet merciful enough to treat their enemies with dignity. Warriors who fought not for conquest but for protection. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps the universe did need such a species. Or perhaps they would fail, and the galaxy would continue as it always had, with the strong devouring the weak. Either way, suspected he would live to see the answer, and despite everything, he was curious to learn what it would be. The stars continued to burn in the darkness, cold and distant and uncaring, but now there was something new among them, a force that would not tolerate cruelty, a power that would stand against the predators. The Terrans had returned, and the galaxy would never forget them again. On the bridge of the Enduring Hope, Cole received reports from across the system. The prisoners were secured. They were safe. Her fleet had suffered minimal damage and no casualties. It was a perfect victory, the first of many to come. She thought about the future, about all the battles that lay ahead. The hegemony would not accept this defeat quietly. Other powers would see humanity as a threat to be eliminated. The galaxy would unite against them, or try to. Let them try, thought. We've been waiting for this for 500 years. We're ready. She looked at the stars through the observation window, at the vast expanse of space that stretched out in every direction. Somewhere out there, billions of beings lived in fear. Species that had never known safety, that had always lived under the shadow of conquest. That was going to change. Admiral, Daniel said, approaching her, the fleet is ready to move to our next assignment. 3 more systems have reported activity. Then let's go, turned from the window and headed for the bridge. The galaxy has been waiting for us long enough. The Enduring Hope began to move, its massive engines glowing with power. Around it, the rest of the fleet fell into formation. Destroyers, cruisers, frigates, all of them ready for whatever came next. Behind them, Prime hung in space, safe and free. Ahead of them, the galaxy waited. And humanity was coming.